So now I think
all
we
set.
could get started. Good.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Northfielders for Justice in Palestine, Israel, our section of the Peacestock Peace Plaza. We're from Northfield, Minnesota, and I will begin with a little introduction of our organization. I'm Darlene Cox, and I'm one of the founding members of our organization, and one of about 12 active members. I visited Palestine, Israel in 2002. And when I saw the daily oppression and the suffering of the Palestinian people, it just seemed so unbelievable to me. And I thought, how can this be going on and the world isn't doing anything about it? And so when I came home, I thought, I've got to do something. And so I knew of two other people who had also recently been over and seen firsthand the situation of the Palestinian people. So in 2007, the three of us decided to form a group in our community here in Northfield. And our purpose was to spread the word about the realities of the situation in Palestine and Israel. We realized that people in general are not aware of the plight of the Palestinian people. And our mainstream media and our churches are not giving the Palestinian perspective. We're now in our 14th year of educating and advocating for freedom, equality, and justice for all the people in that land. And now we have a mailing list of 400 people. And we sometimes have, well, often have about 100 attendees at our major events. Being part of a group, as opposed to acting alone, helps to keep us from getting discouraged and burned out. When we feel our energy waning, we can take a little step back and others in the group will carry on. And working as a group, we're able to do things that we couldn't do alone. So I encourage you in your communities to organize a small group. There was just 3 of us in the beginning. And so that's all you need, or 2 people. Since 2007, it's really been heartening to see gradual, steady growth in the number of voices, including Jewish voices, which are showing support for freedom and equality for the Palestinian people. There are also now more voices in Congress of brave people who are willing to address the concerns of the Palestinians. We're noticing that there's more letters to the editors that support the causes of Palestine. But Palestine is still not free. And so we must keep working. We can learn from the Palestinians that we must be steadfast and persevere. And on Monday, we remember Martin Luther King Jr. and his words, "The arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice." So we thank you for your interest in the work of our group, and we hope you will enjoy your time with us.
Thank you, Darlene. My name is Jonathan Hill, and I'm a more recent member than Darlene, though I've been a member now for some 10 years. And everything that Darlene says strikes an absolute chord in my own feeling about this. It's my job, though, at the moment to introduce you to a short 8-minute video that is part of a longer video we had made 3 or now 4 years ago in 2017 of one of our regular NJP events. This happens each May in Bridge Square in the center of Northfield, in which we memorialize the Nakba, N-A-K-B-A, which is probably a word known to many of you. In Arabic, it means catastrophe. and it refers to the expulsion of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their land and villages when Israel took over in 1947. This brief video falls into two parts. The first, you will see something of the memorial ceremony, which is centered on a large map of Palestine in which all of the hundreds of villages that were destroyed and forcibly evacuated in 1947 are marked. The name of each village is read out in Arabic. We're very happy to have Arabic speakers who join us for this occasion. And then one by one, members of the audience go up and place a flag in each village as its name is read out. In the second part, you will hear briefly from three of our members: our oldest and most revered founding member, Ruth Hanson, Bill McGrath, whom you will meet a little later on this video, and Fred Rogers, each of whom briefly say how they came to join the group. Once the video is over, we hope that you will ask questions. Whether you raise your hand or do it via chat, that's a decision we'll make after we've seen the video and we've worked out how many of you are there. So Ed, if I could ask you to start this brief video about the annual Nakba event.
Today we come together to commemorate and acknowledge the Nakba of 1948. While the Nakba follows the Day of Independence, the Israelis celebrate, the Nakba, as I said, did not begin on May 15th, and it continues, unfortunately, to today. In some ways, the final chapter began in November of 1947.
Called everything in our world did not seem to fit. Once they started invading us, taking our houses and trees, drawing lines, pushing us into tiny places. It wasn't a bargain or a deal or even a real war. To this day, they pretend it was. But it was something else. We were sorry what happened to them, but we had nothing to do with it. You don't think what was a little plot of land means till someone takes it and you can't go back. Your feet still want to walk there. Now you are drifting worse than homeless dust, very lost feeling. I cried even to think of our hallway, cool stone passage inside the door. Nothing would fit for years. They came with guns, uniforms, declarations. Life magazine said, it was surprising to find some Arabs still in their houses. Surprising? Where else would we be? Up in the hillsides, conversing with the mint and sheep, digging in dirt? Why was someone else's need for a home greater than our own need for our own homes we were already living in? No one has ever been able to explain this sufficiently, but they find a lot of other things to talk about. Thank you.
عرب السمنية البصة شويرح التل تربيخة أم الفرج
غربية السوافير الشمالية السوافير الشرقية سمسم سميل
جافا ديستريكت العباسية أبو كشك بيت دجن بيار عدس فجة الحرم إجليل القبلية إجليل الشمالية الجماسين الغربي الجماسين الشرقي جريشة كفر عانة
تليل العلمانية العريفية اللويزية اليردة الظاهرة التحتة الزنغرية خربة زلفة.
If everyone would just come back up here a minute and gather around in a circle. So I'd like to do two things now. I'd like to just take a moment and everyone just reflect on this. And then when we're done, I'd like to invite anyone who would like to come up who is moved to make a comment, to take a minute and make a comment at an open mic. And then I'll have a few closing remarks after that. So let's just take a moment of silence. And I'm going to say amen to that. Thank you. So would anyone like to make a comment? We have a moment here for sharing feelings, thoughts, anything you'd like to say.
In 2003, I spent 3 months as a peace presence in Israel-Palestine. Some count taking us through Jerusalem and the settlements, and her comment during that ride was, "And now my government is building a wall, twice as high and 3 times as long as the Berlin Wall, and guess who's paying for it? The United States." The most significant comment I heard was from a Jewish woman from Jerusalem who said, "We must move beyond the Holocaust. The abuse and oppression of the occupation is stripping the joy out of Judaism."
This old bell, I didn't do this intentionally. It was an old bell I found that I used on my ice cream cart that I had in Boulder, Colorado. But it occurs to me now, the fact that it sort of built on a Native American headdress may have some significance here, because it seems like that same delusional notion of manifest destiny that created a genocide in this land is also at work in Palestine, and may it be done with.
We have much work to do. I thank you for coming. God bless.
There were 3 of us who got it started in the summer of 2007, and we started by putting on a movie in town that was shown in a few different locations, and then we decided to keep it going. We've had a lot of fairs and movies, speakers, events like you saw today, just to raise awareness of the Palestine issue. I was in the West Bank for a month in the summer of 2007, and I would say it was a life-changing experience. I was fortunate enough to travel throughout most parts of the West Bank. I did not go to Gaza. I saw some of Israel also, met some very nice Israeli people. So yeah, I very much latched onto this issue. It means a lot. I am interested in having more and more people know this side of history. And I find no better way than to put on a unique visual event. We are kind of unique in celebrating or observing the Nakba by doing a visual, almost like a theater thing where everybody can join in. So it's probably here to stay. We've done it, I think, 5 times, and it'll probably be every year in early May for Nakba Day.
Ruth Hansen.
Ruth, you're one of the founders of this event?
Yes, well, the event has been here for 5 years. NJP, Northfielders for Justice/Palestine, was organized 10 years ago. And I have been working for this cause for 50 years, since I first went to Israel in 1968.
So why is it important to you?
I have seen the suffering of the Palestinian people, and I realize what a wonderful heritage they have.
I'm here today because I'm moved by the depth of this tragedy of Palestine and by the unfortunate misunderstandings and distortions that have been created over the years about it. I think it's important for all of us to understand that and to be able to accept that before we can move forward with reconciliation and really finding justice.
How are you personally affected by this ceremony?
Affected by the scale of the number of villages, of the extent of the stories of each of those villages, and how difficult it was on the day in which the soldiers of the army or the various groups came to them and forced them at gunpoint or killed people and made them leave. and I find that compelling in its magnitude. Today we come together to commemorate.
Thank you. Ed, shall I say a few words? Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Ed? Well, people are nodding, so I will carry on talking. What we would like to clarify is how those of you in the audience can address questions or comments to us. And I would like to ask Bill McGrath, if he is visible and audible, to make a choice as to how he would prefer to receive questions and comments from you in the audience.
There, unmute myself. That's good. It's been a good day. It looks like we have about 15 people, and therefore I would like to just make the decision that we're going to allow people to raise their hand and just state their question verbally rather than typing it out. Is that okay with everybody? I think it would work out pretty well. I'll say just a little bit about myself here first. Like many Americans, I grew up with a reverence for Israel. I saw the movie Exodus and read the book even, and it wasn't until really 9/11 and the formation of a pretty good peace group here in Northfield that we began having speakers come in and talk about what they were seeing in Iraq and other parts of the world. But we did have some people come in and talk about what was going on in the West Bank and in Gaza. Actually, we were fortunate. And that got my attention. And later on, when I met Darlene Cox, who I can see is present here, Darlene, hi, and Ruth Hansen and some others, we decided to try to do something about the Palestine-Israel issue here in Northfield. So it's been very important to me. I guess what is going on right now in this country, I think a lot of stuff is probably going to really hit the fan. As far as people finding out what is the real agenda behind some of the things that are going on internationally and in our own country. So what I'd like to do is just open this up to people who can ask questions, or if you want to make a little speech, not a big long speech, but a little speech about your feelings and thoughts about the Palestine-Israel issue. Just raise your hand and I'll call on you, but you'll have to probably unmute yourself. Everybody knows how to unmute. Little thing in the corner there, you just click on it and then you can talk and people can hear you and so on. So does anybody want to raise their hand right now and ask a question to Jonathan Hill or Darlene Cox primarily? Yes, Schwen, up in the corner here. Can you unmute yourself, please? Yeah. There you go.
Oh, okay, I may ask a question about, do you think that the war against the Palestinian people set the precedence for all other wars right now? I mean, there's a lot of wars in the Middle East and also Africa. I mean, Jonathan or anybody can answer from I'm actually a new NJP member, so I'm starting with this question.
Thank you.
Well, Darlene, would you like to respond?
You go ahead. You go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, it's a provocative question. my tendency is to remain as precise and as close to the grainy realities of each war to try and sort out exactly where and why it has come from. I feel that the hostility between the Israelis and the Palestinians is unique in that it is centered on what has now been called a colonial settler regime. That is to say, Israel is physically appropriating land belonging to somebody else. I'm not sure there's a parallel in other wars going on, though interestingly enough, of course, what has happened to that huge swathe of sub-Sahara recently, I don't know if you're following the news, that is perhaps going to turn out to be similar. So I would be cautious about saying that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is in some ways the epitome or the synthesis of all other conflicts. I myself don't believe it is.
Thanks, Jonathan. Darlene, you want to add something?
Bill.
I just maybe would say that the recent few countries in the Middle East that have came to an agreement with Israel, and I have heard that the leaders have done this, but the actual people of those countries, the majority of people in those countries are actually behind the Palestinian struggle.
Even this, right, Saudi. Oh, there's a bill.
I just wanted to comment that probably the closest to come to what Schwan was saying, and I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Correctly, good.
Is the situation in northeast Syria right now, where the United States is occupying, and they have we have our proxy forces, the Kurd-dominated Syrian Defense Forces, and this has been being framed as this is being framed in the United States and elsewhere in the West as being liberty for the Kurds, who are a minority in that area. And they have been lording it over since the declaration of Rojava. They have been lording it over Arabs and Assyrians who are different from Arabs, and other minority groups in the Northeast. So it's a situation very similar to what was set up in Israel, where land was taken away from the Palestinians to give to the Zionists, and now the Zionists are backing the Kurds in northeast Syria and elsewhere. They have a long relation. Their intelligence agencies have a long relationship with the Kurds in Iraq, Barzani and so forth. So yeah, there is a relationship between what's happening in Palestine and what's happening in the rest of the Middle East. I think other situations in the world are a lot more tenuous, like in Central and Latin America. I don't think there's a whole lot of relationship there, although there are Israeli intelligence agencies involved in those areas. They are more or less invited by the United States. It's the United States that's driving the imperial efforts in Central and South America. It's also, I might just add, Israel itself, the Zionist effort itself, was in large measure a British Foreign Office operation as early as the 1840s. Lord Palmerston was trying to set up what they called a buffer state in Palestine. They felt that by encouraging Jews to make aliyah to to the Holy Land and setting up a new state that that Britain supported, that they would have the loyalty of that new state, and it would act in their interest against the Ottoman Empire and the French and so forth and so on, and the Arabs in the area. So there's long history there too.
If it would be okay, I'd like to just broaden this up to anyone else that would like to comment on this topic of whether what's going on in Israel, Palestine is affecting the rest of the world, especially the Middle East. Anybody want to weigh in on that? And if not, we could entertain another question from the audience. Just please raise your hand. Yeah, Gail has something there. Hey, Gail.
Hi.
Can you Good.
Yep, I just did. On Wednesday, I was on a webinar that was titled "A New Congress, a New Administration, New Opportunities for Palestinian Rights," that was put on by the Methodist Federation of Social Action. And the two panelists were Kyle Crisafalo, I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, from the Churches for Middle East Peace, and Mark Harrison from the General Board of Church and Society of the United Methodist Church. And I was wondering what your take is on what the new administration would be like with the Palestinian, if there would be changes, or if there would be a new direction. What do you think?
Gail, can I direct that question to Darlene, and then Jonathan can weigh in? Darlene?
My understanding is, or I guess my sense is that Biden will be look more kindly to humanitarian issues, and I think he might restore money to UNRWA and maybe some other needs in the humanitarian area. But as far as actual moving of the embassy back to Tel Aviv, or some of Trump's moves, I'm not sure he'll go in that direction. Jonathan?
I would agree absolutely with what Darlene has said. I would go further, although to repeat, I cannot see the Biden administration reversing any of these catastrophic Trump decisions, like moving the capital, recognizing the Golan Heights as being Israeli, sending high-level officials to visit colonial settlements in Palestine. Tragically, there's going to be no physical drawback, but there's a much greater danger, which those of us on NJP are fully aware of. Benjamin Netanyahu famously said at one point that there are two occupied territories in this world. One is the West Bank, and the other is the US Congress. They occupy the US Congress by virtue of their economic hold over many, many elected officials. But in the last 10 days, it's become terrifying, because one of the things that's been demonstrated in the last 10 days is, for millions of people in this country, the roots of democracy and human rights are so shallow. And that, in fact, is what much of those of us in NJP draw upon. We draw upon what we assume was a deep and more or less universal belief in this country in democracy, in the right of people to be in charge of their own future, and in the basic concepts of human rights. What's going to happen under the Biden administration, I don't know. I'm sure Biden himself, who seems a very kind, sympathetic person, he might verbally subscribe to all of these things. But whether members of Congress, and this is where the future of Palestine lies, I think, whether they will suddenly wake up one morning with a clearer vision of what they have been supporting has yet to be seen.
Thank you, Jonathan. Bill, you wanted to weigh in?
Yeah, Nancy Pelosi famously said that if the Capitol were burned down and were in ashes, what would remain would be our aid to Israel.
Yeah.
She actually said that, or no, not those exact words, but essentially that.
Can I just add something, Bill? Jonathan. You all may remember that when Biden, as vice president, visited Jerusalem to meet with Netanyahu, Netanyahu announced a whole new settlement program the day before Biden came to kind of demonstrate his independence. And you might have observed that in the last week, he has done the same thing again. He's announced a whole new set of settlements in Jerusalem, bombed Syria yesterday, and there's a very large story in Haaretz this weekend about the nuclear program in Israel and how they developed nuclear weapons at the same time that Israel and the Trump administration are advocating for starting a war with Iran over their nuclear program, which has been frustrated by our withdrawal from the treaty. So there's this whole effort going on to basically neuter Biden before he becomes president with respect to Israel. I would say his track record of standing up to those kind of tactics is not good. And we'll see whether he has the gumption to stand up and actually confront. I mean, basically, Netanyahu is the same type of bully as Trump with respect to his foreign policies. And so he's practicing that, and we'll see how this goes. But it's interesting that it's playing out this week exactly the way it was the last time when Biden was involved. And basically, he's sending a message to him.
Anybody else like to comment on this? We're talking about the Biden administration in their relationship to Israel-Palestine. Biden.
Well, what Darlene said was basically what they said on Wednesday. Darlene, you must have attended that with me.
Yes, I was there.
Were you? Oh, you were at that, weren't you?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I did see your name.
Can I, Bill, mention another aspect of NJP work?
Yes.
We spend a lot of time writing to Congress people, lobbying various officials one way or the other. For myself, there are many dimensions to the Palestinian issue. One of the most distressing I find is the incursions that pro-Zionist Israelis have made into human rights and free speech in this country. Whether, of course, it is accusing anyone who doubts Netanyahu of being anti-Semitic, or whether it is lobbying state legislatures to introduce anti-BDS legislation, which essentially penalizes those who criticize Israel. But I want to add something else. One of the great hopes, I think, upon which all of this should be relying is the conscience and the energy and the proven historical record of liberal American Jews who are as horrified, I'm quite certain, I know this as a fact, who are as horrified as we are by the kind of policies being pursued by extreme right-wing Zionism under Netanyahu as any of us in more liberal democracies. And so one of the great unknowns is to what extent will liberal Jewry in this country once again rally itself and this time take on the very, very difficult and painful business of criticizing themselves or criticizing those other Jews with whom they so profoundly disagree over what is being done to the Palestinians.
I put a lot of hope in the young Jewish people. They're growing in number, and Jewish Voice for Peace is growing, and I don't know. I think they will bring a lot of power and pressure, and I don't know. I'm putting my hope in them.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Yes, Gail.
I just want to say thank you for all that you're doing. I have been to the Nakba thing a couple times. In fact, that video you were showing, the first person to put it in, I think, was my husband as he was turning around. And then I've been to some of your other programs. And a couple years ago, the Church and Society team had a Peace and Justice Summit at the Northfield United Methodist Church. And somebody on the Church and Society team, because we were having Darlene and some other people talk about your organization at the end. And some of the people on the Church and Society team said, well, you know, with all due respect, maybe we should have a group that's more in tune and knows more about the Palestinian situation. And Jared Morey said, you can't get a group better than the Northfielders for justice in Palestine. So you're doing good work.
And it was Bill McGrath and Allison down there. You can see her name spoke that day. So thank you to them.
Okay, but you were helping with everything else, with the kitchen and all that. But anyway, you have the respect of a lot of people in the state with the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Ed, did you have a question or a comment?
Well, I was just going to say, because since the Methodist Church was mentioned, that one thing that drew me to NJP was a talk I attended there by, I believe it was Anna Baltzer, yeah. A Jewish woman who had visited Palestine. I'm not sure she's an Israeli, but she visited the West Bank and gave a very powerful presentation on what was going on there. And it resonated with me because I visited Palestine a few times and saw some of the humiliation that was projected onto Palestinians. But she laid it out and has since published a book, I believe, on that. Yeah, do you know the title of it, Fred?
I don't know the title. She also has a video.
I think it was Life in Occupied Palestine. Does that sound?
I think it had witness in the title.
Yeah, I think that's right. Witness to Palestine. She is an American. She grew up in Colorado, as far as I know.
Oh, I see.
I have her book, but I don't know the name of it.
Yeah.
Could I jump in again, Bill, and just pick up on
Please.
the pastor at the Methodist Church? We run a scholarship program in non-COVID times. Unfortunately, it's on suspension at the moment, but we're very proud of it. And we have sent or subsidized visits to Palestine by a variety of young people and more mature people. And we very much hope we can kickstart that again, because of course there is nothing like firsthand witness through one's own eyes as to what is going on. The second thing I'd notice is this, but that many of our members very energetically try to keep up with the latest information. And a few days ago, a startling report came out of the most famous human rights organization in Israel, B'Tselem. They've issued a report which finally declares unequivocally Israel is an apartheid regime. And they argue it in remorseless detail. And it's quite simple. If you are Jewish and Israeli, you operate under one set of expectations and laws and so forth. If you are Arabic or Palestinian, you operate under a much lower suppressive set of laws. This question of, well, is Israel an apartheid state or not? This has been blowing back and forth now for 10 or 15 years. B'Tselem has spoken. I think the argument is over. It is an apartheid state.
I just looked it up. It is Witness in Palestine, Anna Baltzer's book.
Okay.
And my husband and I went to Palestine, I think it was in 2018, with FASNA, the Friends of Sabeel North America. And that was an amazing trip. There were only 11 of us tourists, and there were 2 tour guides, and we saw a lot. It was so intense that each night they had a debriefing session for us that we gave our highlights and our lowlights of the day. Sometimes the highlight and the lowlight was the same, but if you have a chance to go with FASA, that would be incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gail.
Yes,
Ed?
Well, Jonathan spoke about apartheid, and you have the difference in how Israeli Palestinians are treated versus Israeli Jews. That's one thing. The other is the difference between how Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza are treated versus the settlers, the Jewish settlers in the West Bank. And ironically, what happens is the Jewish settlers are treated under civilian police law, and the Palestinians are treated under military justice, which has a 99% conviction rate and does arrests of children very young sometimes. And ironically, one of the reasons they give for maintaining that difference between the police, the civilian law and the military justice is that if they put Palestinians under civilian law, it would look like they were annexing the West Bank. And so it's to the Palestinians' advantage that it stays under military rule, which is one convoluted, self-serving justification if I ever heard one.
Has anybody had any experiences with changing anybody else's mind on this issue? And I guess the related question is, have any of you lost friends because of your activities on behalf of the Palestinians?
I'm on the Palestine Israel Justice Project team for the Methodist Church. And when I first started with that, I didn't know much. I knew that there were problems there, but I didn't know much. And I became more educated and have been an advocate for Palestinian rights. So I've given programs around the state and at my own church. And I figure if I even reach one person, that person is going to go tell somebody else. So there was a woman at my church who said that she didn't know, she didn't know much one way or the other to even say I'm for or against. But she said, you have taught me so much about it. And I have talked to my friends about it. So I look at it, sometimes at a workshop, I'd only have 3 people. And I thought, well, that's 3 more people than I would have had if I hadn't been here.
I want to say something. I have a friend who's married to a Jewish liberal, and they are all musicians. And when I mentioned this, what I joined, and she would always tell me she doesn't know anything about the Palestine issue. She doesn't know anything about the war issue. So that's very funny. I thought, you guys are liberal, like a deadly liberal. They're really liberal. But come to the war, that was it. They don't want to talk about it. Then they were demagoguing, just criticize Trump so viciously. Of course, I said, I have nothing in common with Trump's policy. But however, there is serious problem going on with US giving money to Israel and not give to Palestine refugee camp. And all this double standards, why are we supporting Israel? And then we seems the power and the money and just give to Israel, but not supporting Palestine. That's kind of like, so, it's setting, every money seems like the US is doing is get together with the right-wing Israeli leaders, and then they produce weapons and power and the money to control the resource of Israel, whatever the area. Golan Heights is part of water they have to control because the water is important for the people over there. Middle East is short of water. So mainly they use power and money to control resource. And then they evacuate, they send all the Palestinian people out to say, okay, you guys go. Let the Europeans solving the refugee problem. You guys run out. We don't want you to stay here. So they take the resource. So I'm saying, that's why I asked the first question, we say, all the wars now is making a chaos of a country and then try to control of the strategic resource of that country or something, try to get from people. weak people. And then if they're weak, they're not weak, then they just use guns and control people with violence. And in US, the same thing, practice, oppressed minority, colored people with those Israel military kind of tactics. They said that that's what I see all in, and people try to get money and power and oppress the, peaceful citizen and drive them away from the land belong to them. It's just totally bully behavior, and I just outrageous. I felt like I'm sorry. Am I answering? I'm just part of a participation of this bully behavior of the U.S. and we're still claiming the beacon of the democracy. Scoundrel.
Could I respond to this, Bill?
Yes, please.
I mean, we know that there are two overshadowing narratives which control much of our discussion. One is the hideous experience of the Holocaust, the Jews, and I might say many others, that were murdered by Nazis in the Second World War. I mean, there is a moral load there of guilt, which is so heavy it's unimaginable. That's one narrative. And it's on the basis of that narrative that many people, understandably, we're all busy, we all have different concerns, we cannot untangle the complexity of every problem. Many people say, oh my goodness, the Jews went through this, they deserve whatever they want. And obviously that's a reductive simplification, but that is one position. But the other, much more sinister position is the war on terror. Every time Gaza fires some feeble little rocket, which has no more power than the average firework here, whenever we fire off fireworks, up goes the lamentation. They're terrorists, they want to kill us all, we have to retaliate. And of course they retaliate with 100, 500 times the amount of force. So on the one hand, you have this inherited guilt, which in a sense, everyone should feel to a certain extent, but perhaps no more than the guilt for every such genocidal slaughter that's taken place in human history, and there have been many. And on the other hand, many people feel the fear of terrorism. Well, now, of course, what's happened in the last week is that terrorism is not about them out there. It's about our own neighbors. And how this is going to alter what might be called the moral and emotional calculus, we have yet to see. I hope it alters it some way in favor for the Palestinians, but then, of course, I'm professionally optimistic about the Palestinian issue. I have to be, otherwise one couldn't carry on.
Another bit of optimism that I see is the growing movement regarding racism that started with George Floyd this summer. And I think people are more sensitive now to that issue. And maybe the connection can be made between the racism that's going on in Palestine. So I have a little hope there that that connection gets made, that in Palestine, that is also racism that's been going on since, I guess, since the British mandate ended and Israel declared a state.
Thanks, Darren.
Yeah, I would, anyone who's been to Palestine, and I'd been once, I went 3 years ago, you merely have to look at the graffiti. If you want to know what anti-Arabic racism is like, it's all over the West Bank where, right-wing Zionists can write what they wish. But Bill, could I interrupt? We are running out of time, and I'm really eager for other members of the audience just to say something, to ask a question, make a comment, whatever they might like to do.
Denise?
Yeah.
Yes, Denise.
I just wanted to ask, what do you do in Northfield? I mean, how often do you meet, or is it's all online now? Or, you know, besides writing letters and, you know, lobbying stuff, that's great. But where do you meet?
Thanks, Darlene.
Yes, we usually meet once a month. And then we divided our group, it was Allison's suggestion, that we form subcommittees. So we now we had a subcommittee working on this project. And so then for those people, there may be some extra meetings in between meeting with other members of your subcommittee.
But they are all virtual.
Yes, yes, you're right. Yes, yeah. And we have held, we created our first webinar or a Zoom meeting last fall because we usually hold a big event in the fall. And because we couldn't, because of COVID, we decided to move into the Zoom field, and we had 2 guests, and we were happy with that. So we may do more of those kinds of things.
Well, I want to jump in. We will be having another Zoom meeting in mid-February. The exact date has yet to be decided, in which members of us in NJP will speak more candidly and personally about our engagement with NJP work. We've already started talking about it, but we want to open up much more fully. You will find the precise date, as in when we've pinned it down, on our website, njpmn.org.org. Urge you to do that.
Thank you. And that address is in the chat box, if you are interested. njpmn.org.
We only have a few more minutes, but if anybody would like to make either a question or a comment, here's your chance. Just raise your hand. Denise, again.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment that the Uyghur situation in China is a little similar to the Palestinian people, I think.
Agreed. Yeah.
Tell us more. Would you like to respond to that, Darlene or Jonathan?
Well, I was just saying, I think a difference is with Palestine, Israel, we are spending lots of our tax money there. Yes. So we have some responsibility.
You're right.
Yeah. Yes, this question often comes up by defenders of Israel, namely, well, why are you picking on Israel? There are lots of terrible situations throughout the world, and of course there are, and the situation of the Uyghurs is an utter tragedy. But the reason I personally feel compelled to address the Palestinian issue is, one, the amount of money this country is giving to Israel far supersedes any other amount given to any other country ever. Secondly, the incursions into our own political life that is being made by the thinking of right-wing Zionist mentalities through AIPAC, through lobbying both the national and state governments. I mean, this is real. We are, in a sense, our own rights are slowly being pared back where in any way they impinge upon free speech about Israel.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We have about 1 minute left. And Schwinn, if you want to say something really quickly, and then we'll probably have closing comments by Darlene and Jonathan.
I thought the Uyghur situation is really U.S. major media blew up a liar because you can go read on grayzone.com, thegrayzone.com. They have an article showing all the news, major news. They said 1 million people are being forced to labor. All those news came out nowhere. It's major media to the Uyghur Congress, which is all right-wing, organized to anti-China, the media, try to, anti-communism or whatever the organization is there. And NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, those organizations give the news and the news going to the mainstream media, and then back to the Congress. All these people send out these rumors. And I think there is violence going on with Uyghurs, a small group of Eastern, whatever, I don't know, the organization called the Eastern something related in Turkey. They try to be independent, try to fight for independence of separatists, they call separatists. And they had violence committed against, during that region, against the people, civilian people. So when they did that, Chinese government to start looking into how to, stop this violence, because it's related to the Middle East war, or that Syrian war, and these people went to Syria, became the terrorists, and bring back, and then all the technique. So I just read Gray Zone. The Gray Zone had a wonderful investigative article on that, talking about the source of the news.
Yeah, I think we should probably stop. We have to quit. Ed, is
Yeah.
that correct?
Yep.
Work machine?
Yep, we have to stop.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, everybody.
This has been
Thank you.
recorded. If you'd like to watch it again or watch some of the other Peace Plaza, just go back to Peacestock and go to this Peace Plaza, and you can read and hear some more about the other groups tonight.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Is that it,
Thank
Ed?
you.
Yes, okay.
Thank you.
Goodbye, folks.
Thank you.
All right. Keep in touch.
Yep.